everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Jeanene Wolfe, and today I'm joined by Collaboasis member Erin Hoffman. Erin was on with me a little more than a year ago to talk about the things that she was discovering being newly in private practice. And so we thought it'd be kind of fun to revisit that today and see what are the lessons learned, what are some insights she's gained, what are the issues that she's possibly still struggling with. So that's what we're going to do today. As a reminder, Erin is an LCPC in Illinois and specializes in working with adults who had the experience of an emotionally unavailable parent or caregiver in childhood. She practices through a trauma-informed lens and includes focus on both the mind and the body as teammates in the healing practice. Welcome, Erin. It's good to have you back.
Hi, Jeanene. It's great to be back.
So it's been just a little over a year, right?
Yeah, I think I remember sitting at the same desk actually in July, I think, of last year.
Yeah, it was July. So it's been a whole year in opening a private practice, solo, virtual, doing all the things. That can be a huge learning curve. And some of it can be fun. Some of it can be stressful. You're learning to, be a therapist in a different way than maybe community mental health or other settings that people are in. And so there's lots can happen in that first year.
Yes, a lot has happened. And just that being said, I can tell that in the next year and years to come, even more is going to keep happening. So, yeah. And that's kind of part of what I wanted to share here too, is that this is a journey. This is a marathon. This is not a
right.
And that is very apparent now.
But it is a journey. And I think as therapists, we are impacted by our clients and their experiences and the things that we do successfully with them and the things that are the learning curve. And so it is a journey. But I do feel like confidence in yourself as a competent, caring, smart therapist, it does improve over time. But I think most therapists are lifelong learners. So we always want to learn about the next modality or the next theory or a different population that we might want to decide working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that keeps happening to me. I could just be having a conversation with anybody. It doesn't even have to be a therapist. And we might be talking about an issue. And I was talking to somebody about eating disorders. And I don't treat eating disorders. It's not my niche, and it's definitely not a specialty. I think you have to have a lot of training and a lot of experience working with that population, for example. But we were talking about it in kind of a different way, not just traditional diagnoses or things like that, but just sort of disordered eating and kind of the dynamics behind it. And we were talking about that. And I'm like, wow, maybe that's something I could learn a lot. Maybe I could help somebody with that. And because I became so fascinated about just, how we develop a relationship with food and our body. And just disclosure, I've been exercising a lot this summer. And I realized how much of my own stuff can bring up those interests too. I've been trying to accept that this is a process. I'm not going to see these immediate results. I was like, maybe I could, so you do get excited. You could maybe I could dabble in that a little bit, or maybe I would want to go to a training, So yeah, there's definitely that. And I am always trying to, there is this feeling sometimes that I have to have all the books and all the videos and all of the knowledge of all the experts that focus on attachment trauma in order to be a great attachment focused therapist. I think although there could be a grain of truth to that, but I don't have the money and the time necessarily to invest in all of the resources, because I'll even have clients say I read this book and I wonder if I think sometimes clients think that we definitely read all the books, or
yeah. They'll be like, what? You know that book by that author that everyone's reading?
Yeah. I'm like, no, actually not. But I'm like, let me write it. And I always say, let me write it down, because I get great recommendations from clients. But anyway, there is always when there's one thing, there's always the next thing. And then the next thing after that. And the more that we learn and the more that we do, there's always just kind of that next step. And so accepting that this is definitely part of a lifelong journey. And I think my business and my practice will continue to develop for the rest of my working years, like for as long as I'll, be able to do this.
Absolutely. And I've learned over the years that our life is sort of our on the job training. And very often when we experience things in life, it opens up a new interest or a new avenue to say, like, okay, I have this lived experience. That can be really helpful in being able to affirm what people are experiencing or guide them around some barriers they might experience or things like that. And I see therapists all the time who will change the population they're working with based on what's going on in their life. And that's super cool about our profession. We can be that flexible.
Yeah, that is definitely true. That is definitely a thing. Like how much our personal lives bleed into our professional lives, and like you said, like so many, and we talked about this last year too. I distinctively remember this, is that like people are looking for a therapist that has a shared experience. And that could be their gender, their sexual preference. It could be anything. It could really, really could be any type of characteristic that someone has. And so it's definitely like something that we are always evolving with over time, because like it definitely, like the I don't know, is you may feel this way too. Like it's hard to shut down being a therapist.
Yes.
Like at any given time, it's like, I'm going to turn it off. Like you don't really turn it off.
You don't. I do have to say that I've discovered that when I'm on vacation or out doing something fun and meet somebody new, I do not tell them I'm a therapist. I was literally on vacation in Mexico a couple of years ago, and this lady was following me around trying to get therapy, and I was just like, okay, so from now on, I work at Starbucks. So,
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And you're at the point where you'll hide it now.
Yeah, I would be sitting at the bleachers watching my daughter's soccer game, and the other moms would come up and start asking. I'm like, I'm watching soccer. Can you not see that?
Right. Yeah, that's so funny because that's true. And I think we have the different ways that people view mental health and view therapy is so all across the board. But I have found that so if people know someone like us that that our friend or family member specializes in mental health, you do get you might get cornered at a party or an event and be like, hey, so I have this situation with my whoever, and can you give me some insight? When I used to work at the ER, I was the only crisis worker there. And so I was getting a lot of different staff, nurses, doctors coming up to me and be like, hey, so, I have this family member, I want to talk to you about what's going on with them and what I might be able to do. People just look to you so much like you have this special power maybe to understand these things that other people, I don't know, aren't willing to, not willing to delve into in their career. So,
yeah. I think one of the gifts of being a therapist is that I am so less likely to judge someone or jump to a conclusion about someone or a situation, because you've seen so many different ways people's lives get impacted by life. And, it's just so much easier for me to just think I don't really know what's going on with them. So yeah, you cut me off, but maybe you're just having an awful day and I don't need to get angry about that. I need to let you move on your way. And
yeah, that's true. I remember one of my graduate school classes, the professor said, talking about that. And she said, as mental health professionals, we'll say well, I can, really understand why someone might have done this. There were circumstances. And she said, yeah, we could probably look and say, I can understand why somebody would kill someone else. And your reaction at first is I don't know, the humanness or is, oh, you would never do that. But then, that opens up this whole line of questioning about what we do, is trying to really get to the roots of, and clients want to know this stuff too. They want to know, why do I do these things? And so, yeah, but that's a great point, because personally, I think it has been helpful for me as well. I try to suspend judgment as much as possible. Yeah. And this job has certainly helped me do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's think back to some of the things that you were wanting help with. So things like how to manage your schedule. We talked about this recently, making sure you eat lunch and don't give up, don't fill your lunch break just because someone needs an appointment. You need a break. Intakes, how that's going, documentation. What are your thoughts on any of those things?
So I feel like in the last year, I have learned a lot about that. And the first thing off the top of all that is, that goes with all those things is boundaries. If you don't set boundaries, I don't want to say you set yourself up for failure. I don't want to say it like in such it's an absolute, but it makes things a lot harder. And by boundaries, I mean like with your time, with how you're willing to communicate with clients. Like, are you allowing people to email you or text you or call you outside of your working hours? And are you willing to see people later in the day? Are you willing to see, and on weekends, whatever that may be? One of the things I found to be true is that I still feel this way because I feel very honored when someone calls me. I feel like in fact, recently I've had some referrals where they called me and they said, I actually reached out to you because I read your bio on your website and what you specialize in. And I need something like that. So I found that to be so cool and exciting. But at the same time, sometimes in this situation, a couple of the people that did reach out, it was hard to get them on the schedule for various reasons. And it just like our schedules weren't lining up. And so it was so easy. It would have been so easy for me to say like, okay, like we'll work it out. Like we'll do this. But I really have worked hard on that in the last year, that as great as that is, as much as my practice needs the income, I can't spread myself so thin across the board just to make that happen. And I think that that's really important for therapists in general and anybody who's listening and thinking about opening a private practice. Like, what are your boundaries? Like just like even starting with simple things like what part of the day do you feel the most energized? When do you know that you need to eat? Like, when do you know that you might need a rest? I feel like I grew up with kind of the idea that like you just push, like you do as much as you can. And my dad was a very hardworking man and he would say those things, but also you realize very quickly as a therapist that 4 hours of back-to-back clinical work is intense. And some people might say, oh, well, that's a 4-hour workday. It's a lot more than that. And so just kind of like really challenging some of these ideas about how to structure your practice so it works for you and works for your clients, and having the confidence like, hey, I might need to say no to this person for a specific reason, but it's because it protects me too. And I've talked about a lot of this with you guys in the collab groups about how it's a hard thing. Like I've struggled with it. So it's definitely a work in progress, but that's just kind of one of the things. All of this has to come with boundaries and structure too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we talk about sometimes in the groups is therapists, it's hard to establish those boundaries. Pretty much once we get to the point where it's clear that we need them, then we can hold on to them better. But at the beginning, we care about people. That's why we do this work. So if someone's saying like, oh my gosh, I really need to see you today, and your only opening is your lunch break, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to see them. If you can't do it for yourself to hold that boundary and realize that we're the lowest level of care. So we've taught them how to establish resources and relationships and all of that. So typically we're not working, and with the online virtual therapy as well, but we're not working with people who are like have acute needs. Mm-hmm. So they probably don't really need to be seen today. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do it for yourself, just think, if you give up your lunch break today, are you really going to be any good for the rest of your sessions that day? Is every single client going to lose out in some little way? Like, they're probably still going to have a great session, but is it going to be, maybe you don't have as much insight because you're mentally, fatigued or things like that.
Absolutely.
And it does impact others. And so I really think it's a good way for therapists who struggle with boundaries to look at it. Like, let's reframe this. You're not doing it for you. You really are, but you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for all your other clients.
Absolutely. And being very honest, until you mentioned that in the groups, within the last year, I have not had employers in the past that have necessarily addressed that, because I think it was coming from more of a place of like, more is better. Private practice is the first time, I kid you not, where like someone, and it was you, who said, like, if you can't take care of yourself and you can't, like, you have the right to say, I don't want to work it in the evenings because I'm not the best version of myself at that time, that's a great point. Like, if we don't fill our cups and we don't understand what leads to burnout, that is ultimately going to affect our clients and the quality of work that they receive. I think I got a LinkedIn request from BetterHelp, who they offered me to see 40 clinical hours a week, but what was so great about it is that I could make, 6 figures. But, hopefully in private practice, we're going to be taking a bigger income home, but there are just some things that I found out I'm not willing to do. Like, I am not going to me, I would be miserable seeing that many clients per day. So I think, like, when you said, like, we have to really be aware of our needs, because we are the product, like, we are the tool, we are the what we are providing is coming 110% from us, from our minds, from our energy levels, from our, what we can serve as far as that goes, giving that to our clients. So it's so important. And that was really eye-opening for me.
Mm-hmm. It can be hard work. And when you're new in private practice, realizing that a lot of the things we're taught in grad school exist in an ideal world, and we are in the real world. And so everything is not going to look exactly the way we're taught that it should. Taking every client who calls you, you can't do that in the real world. There's so many things, never referring out a client. That's become such a big issue over the last couple of years. And I'm glad the conversation is happening because, well, first of all, I learned pretty early on that I have to listen to my gut. If I'm doing an intake with someone and my gut is going, no, 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 and I continue and you work with them as a client, I'm always going to be miserable later. It's going to be a bad fit. Whatever reason, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And then it is okay to refer that person out. Ideally, we don't take them on to begin with, or maybe something about them changes. Or, with all the political goings on these days, there are people who are being more upfront about their biases or even about their prejudices. And so you could be working with a client who now is speaking against something that's part of your identity. And in grad school, they would say, well, you just have to manage your countertransference and it's going to be okay, but you have to show up for the client. And I'm sorry, in today's world, I don't agree with that. We can appropriately and ethically refer out as long as we do the process right. But I see people all the time, they're like, no, you took them on as a client, you have to have them. Like, manage your countertransference. And I'm like, I'm just tired right now to manage my countertransference. I can find a therapist who's going to love working with that person.
And that's the thing. And that's also painting this picture that there's something about therapists that you're supposed to just be able to do that. Your humanness is not important. Like, you have to manage your countertransference. And what happens if we have a really hard time doing that with a particular client? Like that, then it makes perfect sense to me that that's going to harm not just the client, it's going to harm two people. It's going to harm the therapist and the client. And and how can you, if you're working with someone who is, like you said, has strong feelings about something that's a part of us, regardless of what that is, if we're not feeling safe, it's not fair to us to have to put that feeling aside, because again, that person is their treatment is going to suffer, and so are we. So yeah, and that's a great point, because that's another thing we've talked quite a bit about in the groups, is like there is a totally like acceptable way to provide referrals and refer out. And especially to your point, that there will be a therapist that's like, oh my gosh, like that's my ideal client.
Mm-hmm.
There will be, like, just because it's not to us,
Right.
doesn't mean that someone wouldn't be able to provide great service to that person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's another big learning curve in private practice, is starting to recognize and push back against some of the things that we're taught as absolutes in our therapy work. And like I said earlier, it can't happen. That's an ideal world they're talking about. We can't be a blank slate all the time, maybe for periods of time with certain cases or certain sessions. But we have to, I think it takes courage and people having the conversation to accept that, okay, they gave me all the skills I needed to do the work that I do as a therapist, but they also passed along ideals and unrealistic expectations that need to be relooked at in the way they're being taught.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too. And, I really enjoyed my graduate program. But at the same time, their focus is to make sure that we have the required skills, like the counseling skills and the knowledge. And a friend of mine who we talk all the time, she just opened her own practice as well. And our support to one another has just meant so much. But we were actually talking about countertransference, and she said it's almost like if we could have had a whole class on it, because the typical countertransference is like, well, what do you do if like your client reminds you of your mother or something? So it's like, but she made such a great point. She said, but what isn't covered is, like, what do you do when you feel, let's say you have a client that makes you feel particularly sleepy, or like you're in a session that it just makes you're tired, or maybe you feel really, really energized is always good. But what I was really more so saying was, like, let's say you're wanting to do more for somebody, like, you're wanting to do more, or you're wanting to, I don't know, and feel really, really responsible for their success in therapy or their well-being, just anything that you have this really strong reaction to. And we were saying that stuff doesn't really get talked about. And then you're in a session, and this is like you said, it's on the job learning. And then you kind of learn to deal with that. That's something I also encourage any therapist listening, is like really becoming really familiar with your feelings in sessions too, because they mean a lot about you, but also possibly about the client too. So I just think that that's really interesting, because that is true. Like, manage your countertransference. Like, okay, but tell me about all the different types of it, how it can show up, when it can show up. And so I think our programs are trying to do the best they can to give us the foundation, but there is so much more.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. So have you had exposure in this first year to other like modalities that you're like, ooh, I'm learning about this from this therapist, and maybe that's on my to-do list to learn down the road? Have you had much of that happening in the first year?
Yeah, I've had some. Yeah, actually now that I'm on my own, I feel like I have more flexibility and more interest to do that. Yeah, and so one of the modalities that I want to spend some more time learning about is ACT. I know some of the tenets of it, just about, I did start reading the book that's like about the theory of ACT, and just saying that how we're viewing mental illness is like we're diagnosing everything. Like all human suffering is now like has a diagnosis. It's pathologized. Like, right. I think that's really interesting too. And just the way people identify with their thoughts and identify with their problems and take those on, I think is really cool. And how, we can create some help people create some distance from that, by how they approach their thoughts and stuff, which is also, there's some overlap with CBT there. But I've been really interested in that. I've heard other therapists say like, yeah, that like ACT is my favorite. That's why I love it. Like it's the bread and butter. Like, so there have definitely been, and also speaking about my friend just a moment ago, she is a somatic experiencing practitioner. She started going through the training, and I think that for a trauma therapist is so highly valuable because I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed in therapy is our body and our body's reaction to even things that we would miss on a day-to-day basis. So there was that, and also polyvagal, which ties some of that stuff into as well with the somatic experience of emotion and just, you know, kind of where our nervous system state is at any given time. So it does seem like being in private practice on my own has allowed me to really look at what else is out there. And it's exciting and it's interesting.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one of the things that became clear to me when I was first in private practice, I was in a group, and the way we looked at continuing ed credits was where's something free I can go to just to accumulate the numbers. And then, you know, when I started working on my own and having more decision making about who I'm seeing and all that kind of stuff, I was like, you know, I really want to budget for continuing education that's going to help me grow as a clinician, that's going to be meaningful to me, not just accumulate the number of hours that I need and to check the box, but I want to actually grow. And that can be, I think that was a shift that I had to make. Not everyone does have to make that, but because of the setting I started in, that was just sort of like how we did it.
Yeah. And that's true. Like, because yeah, they do give us this like set amount of hours that we need to complete. And some of them are like hours of certain topics that we have to, right? And some of those are more or less exciting or interesting. But yeah, like it, and I think that's great that you have budgeted for that. That's another thing. That's like, just to kind of veer off a little bit, is watching your money.
Yeah.
How it's coming in, how it's going out. But that's a great point. Like, and that's a whole, aside from the CEUs too, but that's a great place to like focus on having a set amount so you can do the things that you want. Because these CEUs that, you know, especially like these, if you're doing a certification or you're going to be doing something that's longer term, like I know my friend that did the SE stuff, that's a lot of time and a lot of money, and it's not cheap. So yeah, I think it's definitely exciting to be able to like pick all the stuff that you want to learn about, and then but also, like you said, important to find how you're, you know, going to budget for it to make it happen.
Right. And, you know, there's other ways like that we need to look at the money. We need to be looking at or we set aside money for taxes so you don't get this giant bill that you're unprepared for.
Absolutely.
Also, something that I've been talking more and more about is putting fund for like your leave needs. Vacation, you have like a summer slump, so you've got money to pay yourself with while you've had those cancellations, being sick, all of those things. Because I myself, and have talked to a lot of therapists, I have worked times when I was sick and I should have been in bed, but I was like, okay, I think I'm okay to do this today. I'm gonna, you know, be able to be with my clients today, and I also just can't take the financial hit. So that takes that pressure off. And for myself, I established the rule that if I am asking the question, if I am too sick to work, I'm just to work. I just need to like, if it's popped in my mind, then I need to like, again, follow your gut saying, don't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's another thing to really be mindful of too. And I'm working by myself. So it's just me still, you know, me, myself, and I in my practice. It's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and there can be, and so it can be easy to push that stuff aside. Like, well, I have to, like, you know, you were saying, like, I can't take this hit financially, but at the same time, you know, like we said, it all goes back to like, if we're not well enough, we can't take care of ourselves. We're not going to be the best version of ourselves as a therapist. And I totally agree with you. I think setting that time, that money aside for those times is really important, because actually, I had that experience at the beginning of this year. I just had one after the other health issue, like just sick time. I had COVID. I had some other illness the following month. And then I had to be out in March for some additional stuff that was going on. And it was a big hit. Like I was looking at my numbers and I was like looking at cancellations and I was like, wow, a lot of these are me.
Yeah.
And so it's important to, like, as you had said, and you talked about the downtimes too. I think we recently talked about that in our group of how important that is, like, because I mean, they're going to happen. Like, this is all that's the thing about, like, when you're working for yourself, like, no one's paying you PTO anymore. Like, you are. Yeah. You have to find, it has to come from somewhere. So,
right.
But that's also a great lesson that I've learned.
So many lessons to be learned.
So many.
Yeah. And even just understanding, I know that when I opened my solo practice, I didn't say like, hey, I'm going to open a business. I was like, hey, I'm going to do therapy on my own. And then I realized, like, I'm running a small business. I don't really know how to do that, So I need to figure out ways to get support around that, because you can kind of put off the small business part for a little while as you're getting settled into the therapy piece. But at some point, you're going to recognize that you got to understand what it takes to run a small business. You need to understand the laws. You need to understand all the different things. Yeah. And again, then you get that on that, the marathon, you're learning more, you're exposing yourself to different resources to learn more.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to connect with your peers. Like, marketing has been so helpful. In the last year, I have met so many nice people. I know marketing can be scary for us. Like, I get nervous to do it. But at the same time, like, I would say 99% of the responses I have been favorable, and people wanting to connect. Like, there's other people out there like us that want to make that connection too. And also, it's a great way for, like, they're going to know something you don't. Like, it's just, and we're going to know something they don't. It's just kind of naturally how that goes. Because here in Illinois, I found this out. I found this out by reading a Facebook post. And again, like, my advice also to therapists listening is be very careful about the information you read on Facebook, as well as take seriously. It's not all good. I think some people have good intentions, but it's like Wikipedia. It's not always, it's not always actually sound.
Plus, we all have different license types and we live in different states. So there's so many differences that what one person says is the right thing to do may not be what the original poster meant,
Yeah. Yeah. So I had found out, and this is stuff, like, a lot of my peers and I have shared, like, there was really no 100% way to know what you need to do. I invested in a practice building program. I did find it very helpful. That's costly as well. So I'm not saying people have to do it that way. It does help. But again, it's still, you have to be really mindful of, like, the state specific stuff, because the state of Illinois requires us to register our business with the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation, which I did not know until months into that. The city that I practice in, where my office actually is, requires a business license. So there's all these little things, and, like, it's easy to miss them, or it's easy to not know where to get that. It's easy to just not have the resources of where that information comes from. Like, you don't know unless you talk to other people. So that's why I just strongly encourage that connection with other professionals, other providers, because they're going to know something that we don't.
Yeah. And another typically free resource for people is a small business association in your city.
Oh, yeah.
They have tons of resources. Some of them will set you up with a mentor that you work with for free, and they're like someone in a similar field. You can have meetings. They just have a lot of stuff. If you go to their website, like kits and things to help you kind of figure out what you need to learn. And that wasn't something that was really on my radar till I had been doing it for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And again, because we're not looking at this as I'm opening a business, then the thought of, like, looking to see if there's a small business organization out there, it wouldn't be in our minds anyway.
Yeah. In fact, this is new information to me, so I will look into that. That's the importance of connection, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're right. It is weird, for lack of a better way to describe it, to mesh this idea of providing a healthcare service with making money and making a profit and like running a business. They are in many ways in two different worlds. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And I want it to be successful. I want to earn more money in my private practice than I ever earned in any other job in my life. And most of us do. And so, but yeah, like there's all these other things, these considerations, like that doesn't mean I can see literally everybody that calls me either.
Right.
So
yeah. And it's, the importance of surrounding yourself with supportive colleagues it's so important. And learning from like, I discovered that I wanted to do things this way, or did you know there's this law that's new that no one knows about because we're therapists and we're not looking at the business stuff, and so learning from each other and getting that support. And even things around, a lot of times in the consultation groups, as we're talking about cases, the aspects of the person as the therapist comes up. Like, this is a hard case you're working with. You're doing good work with them. You don't want to refer them out, but it's taking a toll. So let's look at how we can prep before the session, after the session, to take care of ourselves. And just those practical things that you can share with other people. And the marketing, we talk about those in the groups too. And there's so many ways of marketing, and you need to find the way that you're comfortable with, or you're just not going to do it, and there's just so much to be gained by that community, and, getting the support that you need, or just talking to someone who understands like how hard it is to be a therapist a lot of the times. That
right. Yeah.
Totally. We can't even, like, after work, I can't even go down and talk to my husband and say like, oh my gosh, let me tell you about this case I had today. But I can get consultation with another therapist and I can say, oh my gosh, let me talk to you about this case I had today. And they might have clinical suggestions, but they might also just say, girl, that was a hard thing. How are you doing? Are you hanging in there?
Right. Yeah. Go do something fun now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the connection is just priceless. And everybody, and also too, and my very smart friend who I was just, and I just speak so highly of her that we talk all the time, this is the SC practitioner. She has such great insight, and she said it's great to know and it's also great to take a look at other people's, the way that they do things and how they go about them, because everybody's boundaries are different. Everybody has different comfort levels about how they set boundaries or how they do things. So it's just really important to also like kind of know other people, just to also understand that I've had to work really hard on this, that like the way I do things is okay too. Like, I don't have to, I've struggled with this, I would say as a therapist, just in general, even when I was at the group practice, but even more so like with my imposter syndrome in my solo practice, is like, I need to really back myself up. Like, I made this decision. It's coming from a place of like, I'm of my training, my knowledge, a strong foundation in this field. And and it's also taking care of me as a business owner and a therapist. And I need to really work on trusting that.
100%. Because we're all doing it differently. And so getting that exposure to the way others are doing things, and then deciding, okay, I'm going to take this little piece from this person, this little piece from this person, and we're all doing it in a way that works for us, and then being respectful that this other person is doing it differently than you, and not judging them that, well, you should be doing it my way.
Right. I have to be, and being transparent, like I had it was a Facebook situation, and I was reading somebody's cancellation policy, and they were saying somebody was asking about doing a cancellation policy, and someone said, I require people to give me 72 hours. And I was like, 72 hours? That's so unreasonable. I'm like, oh my gosh. But like, I've had to update and revise my cancellation policy and my no-show and like financial policies and stuff. And now I get it. I see why. And maybe that's too many days. Like, for me, that probably is a little much, but like for that person, there must be a reason why they're doing it. And it doesn't make it wrong. I read another one the other day that was like, they require giving a week's notice. Like,
yeah.
So there's all these or some people, and I've read some people don't have a cancellation policy. So,
right.
So it's just, there's so many ways. And I think as long as one of the things that I learned is that if you are practicing in good faith with the best interests of the client in mind, then you really can't go wrong with that. Of course, someone's always at some point will disagree or argue or be upset or disappointed that you did things a certain way, but as long as you practice things in good faith, that's good. But yeah, you definitely learn about a lot of other ways to do things too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so good. And it's surprising to me sometimes that people can be so judgmental in therapist Facebook groups.
Everyone's right.
I want to believe you're a really good therapist and you would never say something like that to a client, but why would you say that to a colleague when you don't even know if you're reading their tone correctly, right?
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. Like I get it. Like it's, we all want to feel proficient. We all want to feel like the way we do things matters and that, we have something to say. But yeah, I mean, please be supportive of your fellow therapists because this work is really hard. And everybody, we all are, it's like that thing that you've read or heard that's like, you never know what anyone's going through on any given day. So always be kind.
Yeah.
So it's true. So we really have to be there for one another because
we do.
A lot of times, sometimes like the support of our fellow therapists is all we got.
And have a colleague normalize something for you. Like, oh, I'm really embarrassed to tell you this. And they're like, oh, I've dealt with that before. Let's talk about how you can manage it, And that's like, what a relief that they've said that, like, I have this view of myself that I'm doing something terrible or awful. And they're like, oh, yeah, that happens in our field. So we can figure that out.
Yes. Just had a recent conversation about something similar. And my friend and I were really scared to say, like, I don't want to tell you. And then she was like, what? Like, that's totally normal.
Yeah. And that type of thing has come up quite a bit over the years in the Collab Oasis groups where someone is like, I'm so ashamed and I've been really anxious about coming and presenting this to the group and please be kind. And I'm like, well, this isn't a please be kind setting. Like, we will be kind. That's the bottom line. Yeah. And like, okay, so you made a mistake or you did something the way that you feel like you should have done it differently. And we're going to be like, yeah, that happens in our field. Yeah. Like after the session, you feel like I went left when I should have gone right with that conversation. It happens. And if it's that important, you can go right on the next session with them.
Yeah. There's also a lot of opportunities in therapy for repair. And most blunders that we make, and I have to remind myself of this too, are not that serious. The main ones are like the big ones that we all know, like you don't do that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But most therapists are acting in that way and in that manner. And a lot of the mistakes that they're making, that we're making, are just our humanness.
Yeah, right. Well, Erin, this has been fun. It's always a good conversation with you. I'm really happy that you came back on so we could share some insights. I don't know, maybe next year we'll do a year too.
Okay, I'm down for that. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so Erin is a therapist in Illinois, and so her information, if you are not a therapist or are a therapist looking for a therapist or a regular person looking for a therapist, her information will be in the show notes if you want to reach out to her about getting services.
Yeah. Or any questions about like starting a practice, or like if you just want to pick my brain, that's totally fine too. I get how hard it is. I needed that myself. So
yeah, absolutely. Be careful with that offer though, because I've seen therapists get like swamped by people who like, I want to support you, but I can't support 50 of you, right?
That is true. And that's my, what is it? The pro bono, maybe a little bit too.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. For all of you hardworking therapists out there, please remember our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely.